little bit differently today. Hope it's okay. You're going to have to stare at me, just like you would in class. Couple slides of terms and we're done, and then you're going to go much more in detail in class. So we'll start with politics. Politics involves the relationships between groups that, now we're going to D, make policy. Policies are ideas that you want implemented into law. So a policy idea is, should we send cruise missiles into Syria to punish Bashar Assad for using chemical weapons on his people a week and a half ago? Politics involves Obama getting some party members on his side and some on the other. For example, Obama, the Democrat, is working with Boehner, the House Speaker, a Republican who he normally does not get along with, politically speaking, and they're agreeing with this policy idea. So another thing you're going to have to do is tell me 8 or 10 different ideas and how Democrats and Republicans feel about it. For example, the normative statements I'm looking for, broad statements, so anyone can have a discrepancy. More Republicans are pro-life, they're against abortions. More Democrats are pro-choice, allowing the woman to choose whether or not to have an abortion. But there are plenty of women who are Republicans who are pro-choice, and there are actually some Catholic Democrats who are pro-life. Again, I'm looking for broader statements in class. Which brings me to the Constitution and how we govern, which is strict and loose constructionist. So a loose constructionist, think Hamilton and the National Bank, believes that the Constitution can be interpreted broadly, either by members of Congress, the President, or even the court system. And a strict constructionist, Jefferson, the Republicans under Jefferson, Democratic group, Republicans are anti-federalists, whatever you want to call his party, word for word. It's not in the Constitution. You don't do it. It says raise revenue, but it doesn't say have a national bank. Sorry, strict constructionists, you can tax people, but not have a national bank. Now, a loose constructionist, and we're going to talk this year about Article 1, Section 8. Article 1 deals with Congress, only Congress, and they make laws. They're expressed, enumerated, or clearly stated in the Constitution, such as raising taxes, something we're going to do in a couple days, the enumerated powers. But the implied powers growing out of Article 1, Section 8 are where we have loose constructionists. So how do we collect taxes? Well, we have an IRS. Nothing in the Constitution on that, so that would be a loose constructionist idea. Strict constructionist, we can have post office. Loose constructionist, we can have stamps. We can have 6 days a week, as we have right now at the post office, and going to 5, Postmaster General, Pony Express at one time, now cars, etc. Okay, the next one is linkage. This is arguably the biggest concept you're going to have this year. It's been on every single essay question, also known as free response, since the beginning of the AP exam. You're linking the people, us, the voters, to elected officials through one of three mechanisms. One, political parties. So political parties educate. They also, their primary role is to get people elected, but they also educate, as do all of these groups, elected officials about what the people say, and the elected officials meet with, educate the people. So for example, if you join a political party, you're more or less following, or you're kind of want to follow the ideas of that political party, and you're going to support the member in an elected body. Interest groups, G, are any group, any entity that pushes a policy on an elected group or people. The National Rifle Association wants to promote freer use or continue free use of guns in our country. The AMA, American Medical Association, wants to protect doctors, for example. So lots of people join interest groups. Their ideas are then lobbied or discussed with members of Congress. And then the media. The media are going to interview members of Congress so we, the people, can know what's going on, and then vice versa. They're going to interview people or cover demonstrations so that the members of Congress know what's going on. Again, linkage, A linkage group links the people to elected officials through one or two or all three of these mechanisms. Incredibly important. Popular sovereignty, the last item on this page, is just the people rule. Think back to the Civil War, pre-Civil War. Uh, many states wanted popular sovereignty for their ideas. And I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Which brings me to the last part of this, the homework, if you will. And that is pluralism, elite and class theory, and hyperpluralism. Last year, and every year you've done history, not civics, but history. You've been doing anecdotal stories. Fun things. You learn about George Washington or you learn about Louis XIV or whatever it happened to be, but they're simply stories and they don't prove anything necessarily over time. Political scientists like to use statistics and larger numbers to say that different things happen. So pluralism, these three terms are three different ways at looking at how policy ideas are made into law. Pluralism says that over time we are going to have backwards and forwards. One group, Democrats perhaps, and then more conservative Republicans are going to get their way. So at one point George W. Bush, Republican, had both houses of Congress Republican. The first, I believe it was 2 years of Barack Obama's presidency, he had both houses Democrat, which is when he got Obamacare through, and obviously he's a Democrat. He now has one House Republican, the House, and one House Democrat, the Senate. Elite and class theory said those with money and or access are going to be the ones who get to make major policy ideas. So I used to be very involved politically. Within 3 months of moving to Alexandria, I knew my congressman, or I should say my congressman knew me by name. In that case, that made me elite. A lot of the lobbyists, the people who are paid to convince members of Congress to make policy into law, are going to, the most effective ones are arguably the ones with the most money. So 5 years ago, Google and Facebook did not have any presence in Washington. Now they have an incredible presence and give millions a year to members of Congress. And by the last thing I should say is the money and the connections gives them access to the member's office and the member's staff. It doesn't usually change a person's opinion. Just because the NRA wants to give you money just doesn't mean you're going to accept it and then all of a sudden change your point of view, because you got to remember you were elected, in the case of our Congressman Jim Moran, a Democrat, by a more liberal constituency, and you don't want to accept a conservative group and then maybe get ousted from government. Last one, hyperpluralism says there are so many competing groups that very little is ever done, and what is done takes a long time. So for example, Obamacare was first introduced by a guy named Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican, in, I believe, 1908, roughly 100 years before Obama introduced it and got it made into law. So that's a good example of hyperpluralism and taking a long time. Hyperpluralism, competing groups, takes a long time. Elite and class theory, if you have connections and or money, you're going to gain access. And pluralism, different groups gain power over time, and it kind of evens out over time. That's it. Remember how it works. You can ask me questions on the attached form, and I'll start with those in class, and then we'll have a quiz, and then we'll go to the group project.